Each culture around the world has its own unique and often strange traditions and rituals that have been passed down through the generations. Some rituals are considered in some parts of the world to be taboo, while it is seen as perfectly normal in others. But sometimes these traditions become redundant or are seen as too dangerous, and they are banned or just no longer practiced. Number 5. The Victorian era was a time when some truly strange traditions were the norm. For example, it was commonplace for people to photograph past loved ones, wear taxidermy birds on their hats, and pass out morbid Christmas cards. But one tradition from the era that is no longer practiced has proven to be truly polarizing, as some people find it endearing, while others think it is downright creepy. The tradition of making jewelry out of human hair, known as hair work, went out of fashion around 1925. But before that, it was a commonplace tradition that was practiced for hundreds of years. Businessmen carried watch fobs that were made out of their wives' hair. Rings and brooches were mounted with the hair of a loved one or a couple's children, and some people even went as far as to collect the hair of their friends and loved ones, storing it in a pocketbook or autograph books for later use. In some cases, the hair of departed family members or friends was incorporated into bracelets or earrings so that they could be kept close to those who were in mourning. It was also common for hair to be added into commissioned artwork or to the frames in which they were being kept. It was even possible to purchase guides that taught ordinary people how to make their own jewelry out of hair, one of the most prominent being called Self-Instructor in the Art of Hair Work. It's a tradition that is no longer practiced, though there are still a few small organizations that are dedicated to preserving the art of hair work. Layla's Hair Museum in Missouri still has some of these pieces on display, including 159 wreaths and over 2,000 pieces of jewelry, including rings, necklaces, brooches, and bracelets, to name just a few. Number 4. A strange tradition that was being practiced by Chinese women in the mid-10th century until as late as 1999 is that of foot binding, something that was unheard of in the Western world at the time and considered by Christian missionaries as barbaric. Foot binding was deemed to be a status symbol among the rich in China, and it represented the height of female refinement and beauty, much like the corsets worn by Western Victorian women to give the illusion of a tiny waistline. It was done by tightly binding the feet so that they appear much smaller than they actually were. It was a painful custom that, in many cases, required some of the toes to be broken in order to attain the desired shape, also known as lotus feet. This name came about thanks to a 10th century court dancer named Yao Nye. Yao bound her feet into crescent shapes, and this got the attention of Emperor Li Yu, as she danced on her toes inside a large golden lotus flower, which was decorated with ribbons and precious stones. It's said that the tradition took off from there, with many affluent Chinese women choosing to take it up themselves. Some of the earliest evidence found of foot binding is that of Lady Huang Shang, who was the wife of an imperial clansman. Lady Huang passed away in 1243, and when her tomb was opened, it was found that she had practiced foot binding. Her feet wrapped in gauze, still wearing her specially shaped lotus shoes, which were exponentially smaller than traditional footwear. It became so prevalent that families with marriageable daughters considered foot size to be a form of currency and a means to move up the rungs of society. The most desirable bound feet were known as golden lotuses that could be no bigger than 3 inches. Feet that measured 4 inches were known as silver lotuses, with anything bigger than that called iron lotuses. Women with iron lotus feet did not have the best chance of being married off to a wealthy man, with the opposite being true with the smaller feet. But in the 18th century, some Chinese writers started to oppose the tradition, and Christian missionaries started raising awareness that it was not being practiced anywhere else in the world. In 1874, the first anti-foot binding society was formed, and members refused to bind their daughters' feet, and would not let their sons marry any woman who practiced the tradition. By 1883, Chinese intellectuals started to consider foot binding as a tradition that needed to be ended, and more anti-foot binding societies started to appear, with membership numbers climbing to as high as 300,000 people. By the 21st century, only a handful of elderly Chinese women still had bound feet, and the last factory that produced Lotus shoes closed down. Number 3. The strange ritual of teeth blackening was commonplace in Southeast Asia and Oceanic cultures as far back as the year 250, most notably in India, China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Pacific Islands, and others in the area. It was also performed by groups of people in the Americas, particularly the people living in Peru or Ecuador. Though its purpose differs between cultures, it was usually done when reaching puberty in order to preserve the teeth into old age, as it prevented tooth decay. In other parts of the world, it was seen as a sign of maturity and beauty, or a way to differentiate humans from animals. The effect was created with the use of ferric acid, which was made by dissolving iron fillings in vinegar. The dark brown solution was then mixed with vegetable tannins sourced from tea powder. The mixture would then become waterproof and was applied to the teeth once a day. In Japan, the practice was common until the late 1800s. Any pitch black object was seen as beautiful, and so teeth blackening was seen as an aesthetic practice. In the 19th century, Filipino nationalist Jose Rizal commented that the custom was practiced by Japanese women as a sign of their chastity, but that it was falling into disuse. In Vietnam, teeth blackening was far more common, though some of these people would redden their teeth, whereas women used a black solution. During the Ming Dynasty, Vietnamese people were forced to grow their hair and to stop blackening their teeth, as it was seen as uncivilized. However, a law was issued in Vietnam which forbade Vietnamese people from adopting foreign practices, and the tradition continued. In the Philippines, a Spanish historian named Antonio de Morga made notes on how the local people presented themselves in his book entitled Events in the Philippine Islands. He noted that they often filed their teeth even and then blackened them, commenting that their teeth are preserved well into old age, but that it was ugly to look at. In the Middle East, the tradition took a similar form, made from iron and copper sulfate, plant tannins, and flavoring agents. The practice was said to have been sanctified by the Prophet's daughter and hence became deeply ingrained in Islamic culture, since it was seen as a sign of beauty. The strange tradition was adopted by others, including street workers at the time, but it was also considered to have medicinal uses. In Thailand, teeth blackening was a tradition until the mid-18th century. However, this version was done by beetle chewing, which left a red stain on the teeth. This was considered a sign of beauty, though it was far more damaging to the person's teeth. Groups of people that lived in the eastern slopes of the Himalayas blackened their teeth with the use of wood tar from certain plants or by chewing specific plants or plant-based products. Teeth blackening was eventually banned by the government in 1870, and the strange tradition declined into virtual obscurity forever. Number 2. The Shrews Fiddle was a device used during medieval times, mostly in Germany and Austria, where it was known as the neck viola or neck violin. The original design was made out of 2 pieces of hinged wood, with one big hole at the center and 2 smaller holes at the end. The bigger hole was fitted around the person's neck, while the smaller ones were placed around the wrists, resembling a violin being played. The device would then be closed via hinges and locked in place. Though it was sometimes used for other purposes, its main function was to restrain people, usually women, who were bickering with each other. In some cases, a double fiddle was used, where the bickering parties were locked in place while facing one another, forcing them to eventually communicate with each other and work through their problem. Sometimes bells were fitted to the device so that townspeople could hear the wearer approaching, giving them time to ready themselves to belittle and mock the offender. Once locked in place, the offending parties would not be released until they had reached an agreement and consented to stop arguing or seemed genuinely repentant. In some cases, the Shrews Fiddle was handed down as a punishment by the courts when husbands accused their wives of nagging, a punishment seen by many as redundant, as they would still need to go home together. Number 1. Some strange traditions may be commonplace in some parts of the world, but there are those that seem utterly irrational and downright foolish. One such practice was observed from around the year 824 until as late as the middle of the 18th century, that of animal trials. At the time, some animals were held to the same moral standards as humans, and their transgressions were met with the same punishments, such as imprisonment alongside humans, and in some cases, banishment. But the sentence wasn't always as serious as having to spend time behind bars. Rats were found to infest houses and were often sent strongly worded letters instructing them to leave the premises, as their presence was seen as undesirable. In one case, a donkey received a harsh punishment for an unknown transgression, but after an appeal hearing, its sentence was reduced to a moderate knock on the head. But not only mammals were brought to court, as there are many records of insects also being brought to task. In one case, a mischief of rats decimated a barley crop in a province in France. When they were brought to trial, a well-known public defender argued that the rats were too many in number to round up in time for the trial, and their lives would be in imminent danger as they were constantly being watched by local cats. Another case saw a plague of weevils that had destroyed grape crops in the town of St. Julien in France in April of 1687. After the weevils were found guilty, they were sent a letter of banishment, including the day and exact time that they needed to vacate the area. In the city of Basel in Switzerland, a rooster was brought to trial in 1474 for the heinous and unnatural crime of laying an egg. The townspeople found this to be an abhorrent act and assumed that the rooster was spawned by Satan himself, and that the egg may have contained a two-legged dragon. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.